I'm getting increasingly concerned about the war in Ukraine, but probably not for the reasons that most of you are. I can't be lectured on the horrors that war can deliver on people. I've seen civilian populations having their homes destroyed, their neighbours killed, burnt, blown up, shot. I've stood next to somebody having a conversation with them as they were shot through the head. I've seen the worst that war can deliver. And I don't need to be lectured on it. And I want this war to stop. But mark my words, if it is stopped because we withdraw military aid to Ukraine, then we will have another war, far worse, far, far worse, a pan-European war, perhaps even a world war. We have got to ensure that if this war is stopped, it is stopped in a way that does not set the conditions for President Putin to believe that he has been victorious over the West, not just Ukraine. And we have got to do it in a way that ensures that Russia does not have the opportunity to regroup, reorganize, rearm, and apply the lessons that it's learnt in Ukraine from fighting Western tactics and technology. Now, I've got 3 daughters and a granddaughter, and I don't want them or their families in time to come to be caught up in the horror of another pan-European war. I am not a warmonger, but I do know the dangers of getting the peace wrong and setting the conditions for subsequent conflict. Appeasing Putin now is not the way to avoid war. It is the way to create the conditions for worse war. If you get the diagnosis for this war wrong, you will apply the wrong treatment. Now, here I'm talking particularly to President Trump, to General Flynn, to Mr. Sachs, Professor Sachs, or whatever his name is over in the US, and to people like Nigel Farage and so on in the UK. The causes of this war was not NATO expansionism. That claim was put out by Putin, and everybody goes, well, NATO has expanded. Yes, it has. So actually Putin, he's got a case. Well, do a little bit more research. Look into it a bit more deeply. Read, and I mean read, not a synopsis, read the whole of the Helsinki Final Act, the whole of the NATO-Russia Founding Act, signed by Putin, the Budapest Memorandum, signed by Putin. Those documents Russian guarantee to respect Ukrainian territorial integrity and sovereignty. The Budapest Memorandum, signed in 1994 by President Putin, was an agreement under which Ukraine handed its entire nuclear arsenal, the 3rd largest nuclear arsenal in the world, to Moscow in exchange for that guarantee of recognition of its territorial integrity and sovereignty within borders. Not only that, but those agreements also recognize the right of Eastern European countries, including Ukraine, to choose their own security arrangements, including alliances. The idea that Putin thought that NATO was a threat because it was expanding to the east is for the birds. It is simply what he's told you, and you have looked at it logically but superficially and have taken in hook, line and sinker. Now, if I'm right, and that isn't the cause of the war, you've got 2 questions. Well, what do we do? And what was the cause of the war? What was the cause of the war? The cause of the war was something else for you to research. You can look at my Substack if you want, Henry Bolton at Substack. You'll find them on there. Documents that I wrote even before the invasion, saying why Putin would invade, what his motives were, how he would go about it, and what his objectives would be. And I've been almost word for word correct. The reason was gas. In the lead up to that war, gas was discovered and mapped around the Crimea in the Black Sea, and shale gas under the Donbass coal basin. Now, Putin doesn't need more gas. He probably wouldn't mind it, but he doesn't need more gas. He didn't go in there in 2014-15 because he wanted gas. What he wanted was to ensure that the European Union didn't get its hands on that gas, because if it did, the European Union would be energy independent of Russia, which supplies, or has in recent decades, supplied virtually all the gas to Europe, Western Europe and Central Europe. Now, if Europe became energy independent through its relationship with Ukraine and the newly discovered gas fields, then Russia would lose all its economic, political, and indeed, one could say, military leverage over the European Union. That would be a fundamental weakening of Moscow. And in Russian eyes, in Russian nationalistic perception, that would be a humiliation for Russia. Now, it's not about NATO. So if you say, President Trump, I'm addressing you now, if you say to Ukraine, right, we're going to withdraw aid, so you need to stop fighting, and to Putin, but what we'll do for you to stop you fighting is we will give you a guarantee that Ukraine does not enter NATO, then you're missing the point. It's not about NATO. That's simply what he's told you and you perceive is logical. The fact of the matter is he's already gained his military objectives. He has seized those gas fields and he has created a land bridge between the Russian Federation, the Donbass and Crimea through the northern coast of the Sea of Azov. He's secured those already. He's secured his military objectives. All he needs to do now is consolidate them. And if you don't recognise that, you will be giving him a victory. You will be handing him a victory. A victory that will be perceived by him and by the Russian people as a victory over the West. They will rearm, they will regroup, they will reorganise, and they will apply the lessons that they have learned in fighting Western tactics and technology in Ukraine. And they will come back harder and bigger and tougher. And probably the objective will be to create to bring Kaliningrad into sort of contiguous geographical connection with the Russian Federation or Belarus. But they will come back. Unlike these people, unlike people like General Flynn and Sachs and Farage and so on, I know Russian ministers and generals. I've worked with them. Ukrainian ministers and generals, I've worked with them. I was the head of the European Union's Crisis Response and Operational Planning team in Ukraine in 2014-15. And I'm telling you, you may not listen, but at least check out what I'm saying. You will, if you're not careful, set the conditions for a pan-European or potentially global war, because you're sending signals to China as well. Don't forget that. Get this right. For the sake, not of me, I don't mind. I'll go and fight. But I don't want my daughters involved. And I'm sure you don't want your children and grandchildren involved either. So please, think twice.